Plot twist. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but your understanding of genre is not yet complete. But after this lesson, it will be.
Everything you need to easily pass English ATAR. English ATAR made simple. Powered by Saints Coaching.
As I hinted at in the intro, there is quite a bit of overlap between these concepts of mode and medium and genre. As you've just experienced, genre as a concept needed its own lesson, or rather, 2 lessons. The concepts mode and medium have appeared 5 times in past WACE exam questions between 2016 and 2022. As we can see on the slide, it appeared twice in 2018, once in 2019, once in 2020, once in 2021. Neither of the concepts appeared in the 2022 WACE exam, so I wouldn't be surprised if they pop up in yours. Normally, I don't read through all the relevant syllabus points. I am going to for this lesson, and I'd like you to try and identify what appears in every syllabus point that I'm about to read out that isn't the concept mode or medium. First one, explaining how each text conforms to or challenges the conventions of particular genres or modes. Next, analyzing the techniques and conventions used in different genres, media, and modes. Then, explaining how meaning changes when texts are transformed into a different genre or medium. And then, the selection of mode, medium, genre, and type of text. Hopefully, you identified the underlying thread among those 4 syllabus points. And that is the recurrence of the concept of genre. It comes up here, it comes up here, and then here, and then here. From these points, we can see that the concepts of mode, medium, and genre are intertwined. That is why I said earlier that your understanding of genre is not yet complete until you have understood the concepts of mode and medium. Lesson objectives. Firstly, we'll define mode. Then we'll understand types of mode. We'll discuss the visual mode. We'll discuss the auditory mode. We will discuss the written mode. We'll also discuss multimodality. We will outline how to determine the mode or modes of a text. We'll analyze past WACE exam questions. Then we'll move on to medium. We will explain examples of common mediums. We'll analyze a past WACE exam question. We'll discuss the interplay between mode, medium, and genre. And lastly, we will outline a simple summary. Let's define mode. This is what the syllabus glossary has to say about mode. The various processes of communication: listening, speaking, reading, viewing, and writing, creating. Modes are also used to refer to the semiotic, in brackets, meaning-making, resources associated with these communicative processes, such as sound, print, image, and gesture. Not the biggest fan of that definition. This is the one we're going to go with. Mode is simply a general way of communicating information. This definition, in and of itself, doesn't tell us much about mode, but understanding the different types of mode will make this concept much clearer. In fact, understanding the different types of modes is probably the most important part of this lesson. Before we move on, given our definition of mode is a way of communicating information, types of modes simply refers to different ways of communicating information. And there are 4 main ways that we can communicate information in the context of English ATAR. Put differently, there are 4 main modes you need to know about in English ATAR. You can communicate with visuals, and doing that means a text uses the visual mode. You can also communicate with audio. Communicating auditorily means a text uses the auditory mode. You can also communicate with written words. Communicating with written words means a text uses the written mode. And then finally, you can communicate with a combination of the above 3, and doing that means communicating with at least 2 of the above. And if that happens, it means the text is multimodal. Let's take a greater look at each one, starting with the top one, the visual mode. A definition for this type of mode is the process of communicating and processing information through images. For this mode, the audience will process the information by viewing it. An example of a text that uses the visual mode is simply a photograph. Steve Harrington. Relevant features that the visual mode uses: visual language features, for instance, camera angle, camera shot, framing, and then structural features, for instance, juxtaposition. Next mode is the auditory mode. Our definition is the process of communicating and processing information through sounds, and the audience will process the information by listening to it. A good example of a type of text that uses the auditory mode is simply an audiobook. If I'm listening to an audiobook, I am processing the information it is providing by listening to it. The relevant features that a text that uses the auditory mode uses are simply auditory language features. For instance, dialogue, object sounds, sound effects, and also structural features such as foreshadowing. Then we've got the written mode, and our definition for this one is the process of communicating and processing information through words, and the audience will process the information by reading it. Example is simply a novel. If I am reading a book, I'm looking at the words on the page and I'm processing the information by reading those words. Pretty simple stuff. The relevant features, probably know where this is going, are written language features, for example, metaphor, allusion, tricolon, and then structural features, for example, shifts in POV. Hopefully, by this stage, you've identified a connection between the way the language features Bible is structured and the modes that I've just outlined. Our final type of mode is multimodality. The definition of this word can be guessed pretty easily just by breaking it up into two parts. Multi just means more than one, and modal just means mode. Bringing those two parts together, we get more than one mode. Bearing that in mind, our definition of multimodality is the process of communicating and processing information through two or more modes. In this instance, the audience will process the information by viewing it, or listening to it, or reading it, or a combination of any of the above, provided that there are two or more modes being used. There are 6 examples discussed in the PDF study notes. We're just going to discuss 2 because they get the point across pretty clearly. Our first example is a feature film which uses the visual mode and the auditory mode. And because a feature film uses more than one mode, it's multimodal. Another example is a poster. It's common for posters to use the visual mode and the written mode. Because the poster uses more than 2 modes, it's multimodal. Bearing that in mind, the relevant features will depend on the specific text. But generally speaking, they're simply language features and structural features, which you probably could have guessed based on our discussion of each individual type of mode a few minutes ago. Next up, how do you determine the mode or modes of a text? I'm sure you can do this by yourself, but here's a really easy way to do it. Let's say we want to figure out the mode or modes of Top Gun Maverick. Firstly, does the text have images? Obviously it does, so we can tick that box and we know it uses the visual mode. Secondly, does the text have spoken words or sounds? Once again, it obviously does, so we'll tick that box too. Lastly, does the text use written words? I'm sure there are written words placed throughout the text, such as signs on the side of a van or on the side of a fighter jet, something like that. But written words aren't the primary method the text uses to communicate information. So we'll cross that box. All in all, we have ticked 2 boxes and determined the text uses the visual mode and the auditory mode. In light of that, the text is multimodal. And that is all there is to it. Let's apply what we now know about mode to a couple of past WACE exam questions. Firstly, compare how 2 texts created in different modes use language features to invite empathy for a particular individual or group. That's from the 2019 WACE exam, section 2, question 9. How should we approach the modes part of this question? Once again, we're just addressing the modes part of this question because that is the relevant concept for this part of the lesson. The way to actually answer every part of the question will come later in modules 3, 4, and 5. The mode part of the question is 2 texts created in different modes. In order to correctly address this part of the question, text 1 could be a novel, which uses the written mode, and text 2 could be a film, which uses the visual and auditory modes, and therefore text 2 is multimodal. As an aside, text 2 could also be something like a poster that uses the written and visual modes. In this instance, the poster would still be created in a different mode as per the terms of the question, because the novel isn't created in the visual mode. In other words, as long as the 2 different texts use at least one different mode, then they will satisfy the part of the question that requires them to be created in different modes. Related to the mode part of this question is the part use language features. To correctly address it, you'd simply refer to the language features that each text uses. In the case of the novel, it would be written language features, and in the case of the film, it would be visual and auditory language features. That question incorporated the concept of mode. Our next question incorporates the concept of multimodality and its influence in a particular text. How does the multimodality of text 3 influence your interpretation of it? 2018, section 1, question 3. Note that this question was from the comprehending section, but your comprehending section no longer has 3 questions, it only has 2. I'll discuss more about that in the first lesson of module 3. And this is text 3. It is the cover of a novel written by Rachel Allen, and it was published in 2018. How do we approach the multimodality part of this question? The first step is to determine which modes text 3 actually uses. As we know, because text 3 uses images and words, it uses the visual mode and it uses the written mode. Now that we know which modes the text uses, we have to address the how part of the question. As in, how does the multimodality of the text, the book cover, influence our interpretation of it? We learnt in the lesson on language features that the word how requires us to discuss relevant language features, which in the case of text 3, the book cover, are written language features and visual language features. That brings us to this lesson's key takeaway, which is that whenever the concept of multimodality appears in an exam question, the markers want to see you explain the combined effect of the various modes rather than just the individual effect of one or the other. That might sound a bit confusing, so let's take a look at 2 sample responses. One just explains the separate effect of each mode, the other explains the combined effect of the modes together. This is what only discussing the individual effect of each mode might look like. Text 3 utilizes written language features such as idioms and colloquialisms associated with a younger demographic to suggest that the novel is about teenage love. The text also uses visual language features like iconography to complement the written language and appeal to the younger audience. This isn't an ideal approach to the question because the question requires us to discuss the influence of multimodality, which implies the 2 modes working together, not the influence of 2 different modes. Remember, if the question wanted us to explain the individual effect of each mode, it would say so, but it doesn't. It asks us to explain the effect of multimodality, the effect of both modes together. Now let's see what explaining the combined effect of each mode looks like. The title of text 3, A Taxonomy of Love, is prominently displayed through its central positioning and large size relative to the visual elements. Taxonomy is defined as a classification of something into ordered categories. However, the visual elements on the book cover, namely the web of interrelated words and iconography, convey the opposite of order. They are random and chaotic. This juxtaposition conveys a sense of irony and suggests that love is not something susceptible to ordered categorization. This is an ideal approach because it explains what the combined effect of each mode is. A juxtaposition that conveys a sense of irony and suggests that love is not something susceptible to ordered categorization. So that's mode. Now let's take a look at the next concept, which is medium. The glossary defines medium as follows: the means or channel of communication, such as the spoken word, print, graphics, electronic digital forms, for example, the medium of television, the medium of newspapers, and the medium of radio. This definition is pretty helpful, but I think there's still a better way to understand the term. Our definition is the specific way of getting information from one point, point A, to another point, point B. For example, let's say Emily has the following thought and wants to get the information it contains, I'm hungry, let's go and get some burritos, from her head, which is point A, to Elijah's head, which is point B. Emily might get the information from point A to point B in a variety of ways. She might message Elijah. If it was the last century, Emily might send Elijah a letter. Or, God forbid, Emily might just go up to Elijah and ask him with words. Each way, a message, a letter, or using spoken words, they all equal different mediums or a different medium, a different way of getting information from point A to point B. And that example hints at a way that I like to think of this concept, which is that medium is kind of like the word middle. The medium must be in the middle for information to reach its destination. The medium is the bridge that enables information to get from point A to point B. In other words, the medium is the vehicle that gets information from point A all the way to point B. Zooming back into English ATAR, what are some common mediums that we encounter? I think the best way to present these examples is to do so as they relate to modes. Some common mediums in the visual mode include the medium of cinema or film, the medium of television, the medium of documentaries, the medium of photography, and the medium of painting. What a fantastic painting that is. Note that the mediums with an asterisk are multimodal. How about some mediums in the auditory mode? Some common mediums include the medium of music, the medium of podcasts, the medium of audiobooks, the medium of radio, and the medium of the spoken word. Lastly, some mediums in the written mode include the medium of books, the medium of newspapers, the medium of letters, of instant messaging, and of blog posts. Remember, all of these examples that we've just gone through, they're all methods of getting information from point A to point B. A book is a vehicle for getting information from point A to point B. With that in mind, let's take a look at a past WACE exam question. Evaluate how a text's meaning changed when it was transformed into a different genre or medium. How would we approach the genre or medium part of the question? As we can see, this question allows us to choose whether we want to discuss genre or medium. How would this play out in our response? If we chose genre, we could write about, for example, how the meaning of Ready Player One changed when it was transformed from the book genre of form and structure to the film genre of form and structure. Alternatively, if we chose medium, we could write about how the meaning of Ready Player One changed when it was transformed from the medium of print books to the medium of film. From that example, we can see that the substance of your response will be the same regardless of whether you choose genre or medium. However, you still need to be very clear on which one you've selected if you were to answer a question like this, where it has the word or, and you need to choose between genre or medium. Why is it so important? Because properly answering the question is always the first priority. If you were to write about genre and medium, or you don't articulate which one that you've chosen, you're simply not answering the question properly. The last thing we are going to do before having a look at a simple summary is to explain how these concepts of mode, medium, and genre are related. Earlier in this lesson, we learned that mode refers to a general way of communicating. For example, Into the Wild is a multimodal text as the audience processes it by viewing it, visual mode, and listening to it, auditory mode. We also learned that medium refers to the specific way of getting information from one point, point A, to another point, point B. For example, Into the Wild uses the medium of film to get information from one point to another. From this, we can see that mediums are almost subsets of mode. Mode is the umbrella, and medium falls within it. What about genre though? We learned in the lessons on genre that genre of form and structure refers to the types of text that you study in English ATAR. For example, Sean Penn's 2007 text, Into the Wild, is a feature film. So, in a way, mode influences medium, and medium influences the genre of form and structure. We're going from broad over here to specific over here. That is all the content for the lesson. Let's do a simple summary. First main section of the lesson, we looked at a definition of mode, and our definition is, as we just saw, a general way of communicating information. Then we looked at types of modes. Firstly, we had the visual mode, which involves viewing information, and the definition of that is communicating and processing information through images, for example, photographs. The next mode was the auditory mode, which involves listening. Our definition is communicating and processing information through sounds, for example, audiobooks. The other mode was the written mode that involves reading, definition, communicating and processing information through words, example, novels. Finally, multimodality, which involves a combination of two or more modes. Our definition is communicating and processing information through two or more modes, and an example is a feature film, which uses the visual mode and auditory mode. How to determine the mode or modes of a text. If the text has images, it's created in the visual mode. If the text has sounds, it's created in the auditory mode. If the text has words, it's created in the written mode. If the text has two or more of any of these, it's multimodal. Next part of the lesson, we looked at past WACE exam questions, and we saw that whenever the concept of multimodality appears in an exam question, you need to explain the combined effect of the various modes used, rather than just the individual effect of each mode. We transition from our discussion of mode to our definition of medium. Our definition is the specific way of getting information from one point, point A, to another point, point B. Examples of common mediums: a common medium of the visual mode, the medium of photography, a common medium of the auditory mode, the medium of the spoken word, a common medium of the written mode, the medium of books. All of these mediums, once again, are vehicles of getting information from one point to another. If I want to show my best mate who lives in Sydney what my bento box looks like, I will take a photo of that bento box and send it to him through Messenger. That photograph is a vehicle of getting information about the bento box from where I am to where my mate is in Sydney. Then we looked at a past WACE exam question, and we saw that while genre and medium may have different meanings, the way you write about each concept is essentially the same. We saw that through the example of the Ready Player One book being transformed into a film. Final main section of the lesson was the interplay between mode, medium, and genre. Mode refers to a general way of communicating information. Medium refers to the specific way information has been communicated from point A to point B. Genre or form and structure refers to a type of text you study in English ATAR. We're going from broad or general at the top to specific at the bottom. Hopefully that gives you a better understanding of these two concepts of mode and medium and, of course, genre. And hopefully you can see now why these concepts appear in the syllabus points together. I know these terms can sound quite confusing, so that's why, as always, it's very important that you go and complete the PDF activities for this lesson. It's only on one page, just one text table. And once you complete that table, you will officially complete your understanding of genre, as I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson. That is it for now. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep it simple.